Yeah. Okay. So I think we had some technical issues with the audio now. So let's just start from the start again. Apologies about this.
Sure.
Dixon, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of Preflight. Super honored here today to have Dixon joining the stream today. And Dixon obviously wears multiple hats here in Hong Kong. Firstly, with Retro.HK, NeoGeo World Tour, as well as the esports federation here in Hong Kong. So I know where we left off, you were talking about sort of the licensing for the arcade centers. Maybe you just want to just start with that, and we'll continue on from there. Yeah,
sure. Well, I was trying to spoil the Avengers Endgame for everyone.
Oh, so no.
If you muted me,
don't do that, because we'll have everyone
I
else's
haven't watched it. I'm just joking, but
yeah.
I was just saying, if I was trying to spoil it, that's one of the reasons why you muted me. So about the Esports Association Hong Kong, it's basically like a bridge between the esport industry and the government. And lately, I think one of the major achievements that we and the government had is that we fought for an exemption for esport venues and stadiums to not need a game center license.
Yes.
So that would greatly help, esports stadiums in general, because there were some problems before, and we are actually very pleased with the government of how fast they reacted this time. And they've actually already pushed out the whole regulation, and then people can actually get registration online already and get an exemption.
Sure.
So these are some of the things that we do.
So I know the Hong Kong government also this year in their budget, or last year in their budget, allocated 100 million Hong Kong dollars towards esports, right?
Yes.
Did you guys have a chat with them about potentially where they can allocate that and what's the best use for that cash?
I think currently right now, if I have not mistaken, the Cyberport is responsible for that. So the Cyberport did talk to our association and some of our members to ask for opinions on how to use it. I think a lot of that is allocated to revamping the Cyberport shopping center, the arcade. Not to be mistaken with like a game center arcade. So that's what it's called. It's called the arcade. Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that is allocated to the Cyberport shopping center to kind of revamp it into like
an event space, right? They want to run some of the esports
event space. Yeah. And I think some of that would go to also supporting some of the smaller esport companies, I think, for event management and all that.
Okay.
So,
Interesting. That's cool. So I guess the next one thing I wanted to also ask you is what do you think about esports overall here in Hong Kong and sort of its acceptability and as a professional career, I guess people who want to pursue that here, and also as like mainstream sort of how it's being accepted here in Hong Kong.
I think we all have to admit that Hong Kong started a bit late in the whole game, but then I think we're catching up okay. And I think most people here are actually quite accepting for esports, as generally you see people are playing games anyway. But then I think there's always this thing about Asian parents of how we would probably want our kids to become a doctor or do business or become a lawyer kind of thing, a banker, And I think it's still slowly changing though. Because back in the days when I tried to go to college for game design, I had the same problem with my parents, and they're very traditional parents. So they would think that if you're majoring in game design, you're gonna play games for 5 years and then graduate, right? And
it's actually a very complicated process.
It is. I always say that there's actually I actually played the least games in those 5 years in my whole life. Yeah. But then, now it gets even harder where you're not developing games, you're not making or designing games. You're actually telling your parents that you want to become an esports pro player. So you're basically really playing games and hoping that, you could find a career in esports. I mean, it is, I can't say that it's easy, but there are a lot of great esport talents in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I agree
especially,
with that.
I think one of the strong kind of games that we are in Hong Kong are fighting games. So a lot of us started playing fighting games during the golden era of arcades, right? So I think Hong Kong has a lot of potential in fighting games, especially. Of course, the younger generation plays a lot of PC and mobile games also, but I think fighting games are kind of like one of these genre that kind of was put aside and forgotten sometimes. And some people even argue that it's not esports. I think there's nothing more esports than fighting.
Well, that was one thing that Hot Dog mentioned last week, that here in Hong Kong, people only say esports is kind of League of Legends is the only esports game in this region,
I mean,
right?
League of Legends is so successful that we really kind of draw like an equal sign between League of Legends and esports.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with how the team is presented. Usually, you know, you're a team of 5 for League of Legends, and you know, you look cool in your uniforms, and you have these chroma PCs and accessories and all that. And fighting games is kind of like ping pong compared to League of Legends might kind of look like basketball.
Yeah,
where you're
popularity wise, for sure. Yeah.
And so fighting games is kind of like ping pong. So you have your own fight stick, right?
Yeah.
You have your own uniforms and all that, but then most of the time you're alone. Even when you go join tournaments outside, you might, just like Hot Dog, right? So he would practice with his friends, like these players from Taiwan, these players from mainland China and all that. So it is kind of a lonely kind of journey. And I think fighting games needs a lot more attention, especially in Hong Kong's esports scene, because this is actually one of those genres that we are strong at. So there's a lot of these great players in Hong Kong that are involved in multiple fighting games.
I think raises a good point, and I also think that what I find here in Hong Kong is that, you know, if you look at what Toys did for League of Legends, right? They literally brought a world championship for first Hong Kong player to basically win the worlds for League of Legends. That brought so much attention from traditional media to that game, and maybe inspired a whole generation of younger players to sort of pursue that. And I kind of see, like, you know, and that's what we're trying to do at Talent Heroes, obviously with Hot Dog and Dennis, is to hopefully try and get them to a stage where they can win an EVO, or they can get close to winning a CPT, and hopefully more of that mainstream media coverage, and hopefully inspire that younger generation. But do you feel like the infrastructure-wise here in Hong Kong, I guess, is there sufficient sort of support or ways in which players can play? Because I know Hot Dog mentioned when he first started training was at the arcades, and actually learnt a lot from these guys who were really good at the arcades and teaching them a lot. So do you feel like Hong Kong has that infrastructure, or is there things that we still need to do to help sort of younger players sort of get up there and get to the right skill level?
Well, just as you mentioned, fighting games originated from the arcades. And I think one of the problems in Hong Kong is that the arcade scene is really dying.
Yeah.
And
because rent's so expensive, right?
Rent is so expensive, and let's say starting from the Nintendo DS, PSP era, and where we have iPhones and Android phones, and people are actually playing much less in the arcades. You know, I still remember back in the days in high school, we basically waited for our friends before a movie in an arcade. So we'll be like, okay, so I'm going to be there at 3.
Yeah.
Just find me in the arcades, right? So it was that common of a place where we would actually meet. But then now, because of portable handhelds and because cell phones, smartphones also killed portable handhelds, kind of, people are actually playing games on their mobile devices and not paying $20 for a game in the arcades. And thus it goes into this bad cycle, right? So less people go to the arcades, then arcades tend to not buy in or rent newer games, and then so we don't get newer games, so we don't go to arcades, and we're in this very, very vicious kind of bad cycle, right? And for fighting games, we have to kind of keep reminding ourselves that it originated from the arcades, right? And that's where that is exactly why Hot Dog is holding a fight stick and not a keyboard or not a joypad, because most of us actually started training in the arcades, and when the arcades are dying and there's not enough esports, let's say stadiums or clubs or venues that are dedicated to that, then we're all forced to just probably go to someone's house. But then, you know, that's never easy in Hong Kong. So, you know, in the States, we can all crash at your basement and we could be playing fighting games for the whole weekend. But then we live in smaller flats. Sometimes we live with our family. It's not as convenient, right? So I just wish that there were more places, more venues for fighting game players to actually train. Not only to train, but then for them to display the skills of how cool this could be and kind of attract the the younger generation to start playing these games, because fighting games, the fighting game scene, the fighting game community is an aging community. We see a lot less younger people coming in to start playing Street Fighter or King of Fighters or Tekken. At least not in Hong Kong. I'm seeing that in a lot of other places like Malaysia.
Really interesting. Malaysia.
Yes, so Malaysia, even in Kuwait, for example, we had a King of Fighters 98 tournament, and there was this 13-year-old kid that was actually practicing at home and came to join the tournament, which is very, comforting for us to see new players. But then I think in Hong Kong, fighting games are becoming like an aging problem kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say there's a number of issues with fighting games that's difficult. Firstly, like if I look at Street Fighter 5, because I know that title the best, right? I think generally it's a hard game to learn, right? And I think the reward system is not as great as, say, a League of Legends or an Overwatch or some of these games, the way they're set up, right? Like in Street Fighter 5, you get a very basic tutorial.
Yes.
After that, once you get to a sufficient level to be able to, say, just execute some basic combos and special moves, you kind of move up the rankings. But to get to that next level, you kind of need either content that you consume online on YouTube, or you need someone to teach you.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's very, very technical. When you get to that level, when you're like pro, it's incredibly technical. People kind of don't, they think there's just two people running around on the screen. But actually the amount of knowledge that they need to hold with matchups, frame data, and sort of just even the psychological side, the rock, paper, scissors combinations that they have to deal with, it's just very, very hard for people to learn. I think it's just
the way that people nowadays are playing games.
Yeah.
Right? So we kind of enjoy that journey, right? So if we buy, Street Fighter 5 came out for the first day, for example, we're all excited. We buy it, we pop it in, and we try combos already. So we kind of enjoy that kind of journey. But then the problem is people in the modern days, especially when people that loves playing fighting games are aging, they're at the stage in their life where they need to really have responsibilities. They need to take care of their families. They need to, do overtime, for example, and they can't really kind of work for their entertainment.
Yeah.
Whereas, video games have always been kind of like a form of entertainment. And so while we enjoy that journey, for them, it's kind of a pain where you have to, learn all these new moves and practices and combos and even get beat online. And that's not entertaining for some people. I think that's one of the problems. And secondly, a lot of these fighting games are not available on a smartphone, for example, while there's Arena of Valor, which is kind of like a pocket version of League of Legends that you can play anytime, between classes, between bus stops. Whereas Street Fighter or any fighting game requires a proper, at least a controller, right? Yeah. And our modern day phones are built with a touchscreen. Yeah. And even if, Capcom or any of these fighting game companies decides to port them properly to a phone running at full frame and all that, we would still lack the correct way of playing it. And thus, we'll always have to play something else on the bus or on the train. And when we finally get off work or school, we go home, and then we could finally sit down and play properly some Street Fighter 5, right? So I think that's also one of the problems.
Well, I think it's also interesting you mentioned about the arcade thing, because it seems like in Japan, when I go to Tokyo at least, right, that culture is still incredibly strong, right? Yes. Literally on Friday night, any night of the week, you go to the arcade, there, it's just filled with people who just came out from work, or people who just want to play consoles.
Japan is like the only place that arcade is still properly surviving, I would say.
Yeah, so I think that definitely helps, because you obviously have a lot of young Japanese talent coming out for Street Fighter 5, but it's just... It's interesting to see there as well, like the content, the whole ecosystem, the shows that they have there. They have a lot of stuff that's helping them a lot. So that's what's really cool.
Well, I mean, the whole industry changed. Yeah. So Street Fighter 5 came out on console first, and then PC, and then now there's finally an
arcade version.
Arcade edition came out on the PS4 before the arcade, right? So things have definitely changed, and we kind of have to really adapt to it. And so, for example, even if there was arcades in Hong Kong that wanted to carry the Street Fighter 5 arcade, for example, it would be very hard. Okay. I mean, basically, it wouldn't even work if you import it, as long as they can open the gateway for the VPN or for the IP, right? So it's not like, anyone can just go to an arcade and find a Street Fighter 5 arcade. So it's easier to just go to a friend's place or, you know, set up something in the meeting room like a PS4 or a PC and start playing Street Fighter 5. Right? So, yeah, things have changed.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we also want to talk about Esports Federation and sort of your involvement in the sort of Asian Olympics and that being set up here in Hong Kong. And obviously we had a number of players from Hong Kong qualifying and representing Hong Kong, right? So tell us how that came about and sort of how you sort of foresee sort of, I guess, computer games eventually becoming like an Olympic sport. I think that's kind of an interesting angle that, that they took there.
So 6 games were selected for the Jakarta Asian Games. And that was kind of like a demonstration exhibition kind of sport. So no medals yet, but then I guess they wanted to see how it would actually work. So I volunteered from the Esports Association. I volunteered to help in the event of picking some of these members for these 6 games in Hong Kong. And we did it in this huge internet cafe in Mongkok, and that's kind of how we met.
Yeah, and I we were standing there watching Joey play qualify for StarCraft 2, right?
It was amazing. Oh my God. I still remember there were a few girls standing next to Joey and just videotaping.
His hands, right? It's
crazy. You know I'm old when I say videotaping. I mean, from a
mobile phone.
Yeah, from a mobile phone, taking a video of Joey playing and his hands on the keyboard. It's basically like typing, right? And
it's like playing piano. It's amazing how fast like they do it. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. So you know, we were very successful in finding the representatives for the Hong Kong team, and we actually have a Hong Kong team, you know, wearing the proper Hong Kong athletes uniform and representing Hong Kong. I think that's a very special feeling. I mean, I'm not taking credit. You know, esports, the whole Esports Association did a lot of hard work to make that happen, especially, you know, the founders and the chairman. But then, you know, I really did feel a lot of pride when we actually see esports athletes wearing the red, you know, Hong Kong athlete uniform and representing our city in the Asian Games. It was a very magical feeling, you know. It was like really one of these jokes that we make in our childhood, saying that, oh, I want to become a pro player, video game player, and I hope one day the Olympics would have video games, and that's kind of how, you know, it happened in front of you, and you're kind of part of that history, which is amazing, you know. So we look forward to what's going to happen in the next Asian Games in Hangzhou in 2022, and
should be interesting. So I guess my last question sort of around this area is around sort of what do you think as like esports organizations like Talent or like guys like Ryan at CGA, what can we do better to sort of nurture what we talked about, a lot of the younger talent here in Hong Kong? Because I feel like there's obviously a lot of great players, but maybe, you know, even with Hot Dog, we remember having the conversation with him last year, like, dude, you want to go pro? And like that whole experience of talking with his work and his family and all that stuff, it's not as easy, right? Because there's always a big risk, because there's also there's a bit of a stigma, as you mentioned. So is there any sort of things that you think that, you know, as an organization, as a group of people here in Hong Kong, what we can do to help build, you know, stronger talent, and maybe even with the government as well, helping out?
I think honestly, most of the organizations we've talked to, including you guys, I think we're doing a good job in trying to nurture the next generation, as in letting them have more chance to take part in the events and learn. And of course, for pro players, it's extra difficult, right? Because you're really trying to focus being an athlete, like a player. But then I think there's actually a lot of things that, for example, a player like Hot Dog, he would actually be familiar with production. You know, he would actually go to different tournaments and see different things. And I would say I see a different career path, even though one day he decides to not be a player. And so, like for myself, I try to do a lot of education, and that's why I focus on the history of competitive gaming. So I'm trying to not just, let's say, educate the kids, right? But then also to educate their parents of how this all was, you know, this is not new. You know, esports might be a newer term in Hong Kong, but then competitive gaming has been going on forever. 1970s, right? And so this is what I want to contribute to the industry, as to telling the parents that this is not new. You know, there's a whole industry going on, and esports is part of a very important part of the whole video game industry. And there's different things that you can do in the same industry.
So you're also talking at universities as well, right? You're basically
Yes.
speaking to younger students. I know you mentioned that Hot Dog last time did a talk with those
Yes.
guys as well. What do you guys talk about at that class? Is it more just informative or around how to build a career in the space, or what do you guys share?
I think that the students are very curious to know, the daily life of a pro player.
Yeah.
So Hot Dog, for example, in my eyes, he's actually a pro player. Although he has a daytime job, but then he dedicates most of his free time practicing and going to tournaments, which is, like one of the best.
He's actually full time now, so we made him quit his job. So he's working with us full time.
Hey, congratulations, Hot Dog. Good job.
Yeah.
So he dedicates most of his time, playing the same game, practicing and training. So the students would be curious as to for example, if your family is against it, or the same. I guess Hot Dog would be asked these same questions over and over again. But I think we really had a great time and hearing it from the pro himself.
Yeah.
Sharing experiences, sometimes sad and funny at the same time, right? Where he says that you kind of have to make up some excuses sometimes to get day offs because you can't really tell your
You were
boss,
saying that last week.
yeah, like you can't really tell your boss that, okay, I'm taking a few days off because I'm going to the Street Fighter tournament, right?
Yeah.
It just, so we still have that kind of stigma, I would say,
sure.
in our society.
Cool. I think it leaves us to a nice segue to talk about sort of Retro Hong Kong and fighting game history. Maybe you want to let everyone know sort of what Retro Hong Kong does here and sort of what you guys are trying to preserve. I think it's super exciting and super interesting as well. Yeah.
Well, it's thank you for using the word exciting because I hear a lot of people saying what we are doing is boring, right? Because we're trying to preserve video game history and archiving things that we find.
Yeah.
So Retro.HK started off as an event. So in 2015, I just had the idea of starting a retro game expo, kind of, because we've been to so many different cities in the world, and there's always a retro game event. Somehow Hong Kong being a port back in the days, we should have a lot of these games and consoles passing by, and a lot of it is left here. There's a lot of great collectors in Hong Kong, and why isn't there any retro game expos? Just an occasion where you can meet other fellow retro gamers, right? So out of the blue, I thought, okay, let's do one. I'm not just gonna wait for someone to do it. So at that time, we contacted a few organizations, and HMV was actually like the first ones that
Interesting.
came back to us.
HMV. Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm still very thankful to Mr. Wu. His name is Calvin Wu. He's known to be the person that saved HMV at that time.
Okay.
And but a lot of people didn't know about his past. He was actually the COO of Sega.
Oh wow! Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I've actually heard of him already, and I actually went to one of his talks organized by the SCMP, I think.
Yeah.
And I went to meet him. I went to talk to him.
Yeah.
And when we got more comfortable, we knew each other for a longer time. I started asking him about history of when he was working in Sega, and that's kind of how we became friends. And I'm still very thankful because he was actually the first one that replied to my email when I was looking for a sponsor to make that happen. He's like, okay, just do it in HMV Central. Like I'll take care of any of the fees and we'll sponsor it. And I'm still very thankful up to this day. And that's how we met some of the people from PolyU, for example, on the first event. So they came to us and said like, hey, this event deserves more space. Why don't you guys do it in our school? And that's kind of how we moved on to the second event, and it happens in PolyU. And we did our last year's Retro.HK in the City U.
Yeah.
Also, so we try to explore different locations. We try to work with universities to kind of stress on the educational aspect. So we're not just doing an event where kids can come and play video games. We're really telling you about the history of it.
Okay. So that history, are you guys collecting sort of like old consoles, old games, the magazines that are associated with that as means to sort of create this history? And also are you you're preserving some stuff as well, right? You mentioned before last time.
So after we started this event, of course we met new friends. We met fellow retro gamers that are as passionate as I am to preserve video game history. So I think in the second year, around the second year, we kind of formally formed a little committee, kind of like the committee to arrange to organize this event, but at the same time starting to preserve stuff. So by preserving, because we're actually starting very slow compared to countries like in Japan. There's GPS, Game Preservation Society by Joseph. There's the Video Game History Foundation by Frank, and so in Hong Kong or even in Asia, other than Japan, we're kind of late in the game. So we're losing a lot of stuff already. So, when you have the sense of preserving something, you're kind of too late already because you have the sense that you're losing something, and that's why you feel like, okay, I should start preserving it, right? So at first we just started collecting everything. And I'm not talking about in the collector's kind of point of view, right? We're collecting things where we can share and where we can let people play, and also starting to archive them, especially Chinese-oriented content. So Chinese games, localized Chinese games, local game magazines. That's where we get our first database, right? So we try to get all these magazines from the past, and everything is in there. Canceled games, prototype screenshots, ads from the past, everything is in there. But as I said, when we started doing that, we are already too late, because Hong Kong, most people's apartments are small. Like, we can't preserve a lot of these things, and once they move their houses or whatever, or when they get married, for example, they'll throw away these things. And now it becomes extremely hard to find any of that.
So how are you guys usually sourcing this? Like, is it you go online or people contact you, or you guys just, it's super interesting how you collect this stuff,
okay,
right?
So a lot of it came from our own collection to kind of start the basis, right? We have a basis of things, and we actually try any way that we can. So all these different methods that you just mentioned, right? So we do announcements online. We do announcements on our Facebook telling people, please do not throw away any magazines that you have at home that you want to throw away. Please call us. I'm going to drive to your house and pick it up. I know it sounds weird, but
so if you want to drop anything, Dixon's here to come pick up stuff.
Please. I'm the trash man. That's what my wife calls me. But you just have to really do whatever you can, because
of course,
magazines are one of the things that are that people will throw away first when you move or when you get married or have a baby, right?
Yeah.
They're not worth anything. They're only worth something if you're a gamer or you have a huge house, right?
Yeah.
So these are the first things that you throw away. They get damp because of humidity. Bugs get in there, it gets nasty, right? And it takes up so much space.
Yeah.
It's heavy. So these are like the first things that they will throw away. And then second, they'll throw away their old consoles. I don't have space for all my old consoles. I'll just throw them away, and that creates two problems. You're basically throwing away history, and you're creating e-waste. Right? So we announced that we do a lot of announcements on Facebook, telling people, reminding people to donate these things to us if they don't want it. We go on these, like Carousel, for example. We look for old TVs, because we're not only collecting games and the systems. We have to preserve all the accessories, right? That
because they're plugged in.
Allows us to play the games like they used to play.
Yeah.
So CRT TVs are like one of them. So we have collected 200 something now CRT TVs.
They're big and they're hard to store.
They are big, and but it's getting harder and harder to get now, to be honest.
Interesting.
So the last batch that we got are all 14 inches. And from my observation, they come from the maid's room, probably. So they're all like smaller in the maid's room, and even them, they have upgraded their TVs to LCDs.
Yeah.
So they throw away all the 14-inch CRTs, and now we're quiet. We can't even find one on Facebook groups or Carousel, and we just sometimes have to, like, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, every time I pass by the trash, like around my house, I'll look at it, and sometimes there are CRTs in there. They usually come in a cut cord, and usually we reconnect the cord, and it works, because most people never throw away their CRTs because it's broken.
Yeah.
They just throw them away because they need an upgrade or to save space, right? So we're at that point now, and it's getting harder and harder to find them.
Interesting.
Yeah. And every time we do an expo, a fifth of it gets broken.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a very accurate number. We have done enough events to kind of prove that. So every time, let's say we take 100 of them to an expo, when we come back, 20 of them gets broken by moving, or it gets cracked, or humidity. Yeah, it's just awful. So we just have to collect as many as we can.
Okay. So do the hardware manufacturers and game publishers actually do this stuff themselves, or they don't really work with you guys on this stuff, or they don't do it at all themselves?
That's actually a very good question, because they do not.
Really? So Nintendo, they don't collect that type of stuff?
Okay, Nintendo maybe, but then why do they have to work with you?
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So for example, I think, for example, in Japan, GPS is already doing a good job in preserving Japanese games. So I think on our side, we have to start collecting, like Chinese games, like Hong Kong developed games, like back in the days.
Yeah.
But for us, it's extra hard because, 10, 20 years ago, bootleg and piracy was a huge problem, right? So a lot of people actually grew up playing pirated or bootlegged games. So in 2019, when you're trying to find original games to preserve, it's actually very hard. Because if someone actually kept it until this year, he must be a collector of some sort. He's not going to give it up to you. Right? Yeah. So for us, I think it's an extra kind of layer of difficulty where we actually have thought about, we actually have to maybe even collect bootlegs to preserve some of that, because some games are just lost forever. Like Hong Kong developers were small back then. They were plagued with piracy problems, so they're not doing good. Again, this bad cycle, right? So their games is not selling good. Their company goes bankrupt. The owner thinks like, this is a bad taste in the mouth. I don't want to see this game anymore. I'm not going to preserve it, right? And all these Hong Kong or regionally developed Chinese games are lost forever. So, which is sad. But then I've talked to some local developers, even some magazine publishers. They actually do not keep any backups.
Interesting.
To my surprise. So, and again, it's a space problem. So, for example, magazines, they would probably throw away the oldest one, but then the oldest one is the ones that
you want to keep.
Yeah, the most valuable, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's hard, and it's understandable. I mean, you can't blame them. It's, real estate in Hong Kong is just crazy, right? So, yeah. Okay.
So at these events, how far back are you showing off sort of consoles and games? Like, is it back to like the start, or like,
well, I wouldn't say the start, because that would be like 1960 something,
like Pong,
tennis for two on like these orthoscopes. But then we have something from the 70s. Like we have most of the more important consoles, like the Pong consoles that you just mentioned, Atari. They made Pong, and then they made like hundreds of variations of Pong, and then there were all these Pong clones at that time. So we have some of that we actually put on display and for free play in our expos. And anything after that, we actually have a lot of. That's why we don't collect things in the collector's kind of angle. So for example, we collect the same console many times so that we could actually let people play them. Rather than just having a very nice package and all that. So
cool. Yeah. So for you, man, what was the first console that you got when you were a kid, and what were the memories of the earliest games that you played?
It was the Famicom. I mean,
Famicom?
I grew up with the Famicom, and I had the Famicom for a very, very long time actually. My parents wouldn't allow any other consoles, so they bought me a Famicom. And you have your game console already.
What was the game? What was the first game you played on Famicom?
Contra, I think.
Contra
and Double Dragon. Because I had a brother.
So you guys could play together, do that
exactly.
double spinning kick together.
So naturally, my parents thought, I should always buy 2-player games for you guys.
Yeah.
Then I wouldn't have to buy like one of you something, right? Okay. I buy you a Double Dragon, and then you guys can just play, right? So Double Dragon, Contra, these were some of the first games, and of course Super Mario Brothers. Okay. So I had the Famicom until high school. Like I played it for a long time.
Wow. Okay.
And then finally in high school, I had my own pocket money, so I saved up, and I think I then bought a PlayStation, like the first PlayStation.
What's a big jump from Famicom to
Very
PlayStation?
big jump. So you can imagine how long I spent in.
Oh, you had literally the SNES, the Super SNES, and the N64.
Yes, I skipped all.
Skipped all of that.
I bought it after. I bought them back afterwards when I saved up. But then, me and my brother had our own pocket money, and we were kind of discussing. Okay, so if we don't eat for how many days, and you and I can buy a PlayStation, and that's kind of how we did it. Yeah.
What are some of your most, I guess, best retro games that you really like that you grew up playing?
Well, so for example, Contra, of course, and I still really love to play all these retro fighting games.
Yeah.
Street Fighter 2 and all the older King of Fighters. Yeah. Yeah, and then wow, there's just too many to list, and I think retro games are suits our lifestyle better now that we're all like very busy.
You have that shorter. You don't have like an hour to play every day, right? You've only got like 5, 10 minutes.
Everyone has that. New gamers would have that experience where you buy a game and then it takes 4 hours, to install and update and all that, and by that time you're too tired already. And you still have to learn all the controls, right? And a lot of people mistaken that I don't like newer games. No, I have a PS4, okay? I have an Xbox One, I have a PS4. I love newer games. It's just that sometimes, if you have half an hour before sleep, it's like mind exercise, right? You turn on the Famicom, you play some Contra and beat it in half an hour. It's like a kind of like exercise for your mind,
Interesting. So I think it's a nice. It's good to. I want to talk to you a little bit about the NeoGeo World Tour.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So obviously, it'd be good for you to explain this. But two of the main games you guys are playing there is King of Fighters 98 and King of Fighters 14.
Yeah.
Right. It's similar to, I guess, like Tekken World Tour or the CPT and things like that. You guys travel around the world. Yes. I also noticed that you guys play a whole bunch of other games during these tours as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So do you want to just talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at NeoGeo and sort of and your global tour?
Sure. So the NeoGeo World Tour is an officially licensed world tour by SNK. So we're very happy and honored to be working with SNK because I think they're still one of the best companies in terms of how they use their hardware to its limit. And there's, if you make new games on that MVS or NeoGeo hardware, it would still look good up till today.
Well, I must admit, those games, the 2D versions, have stood up to the test of time. They still look amazing. People still play them because for that reason.
We would say they aged well. It's like a wine, right? To be honest, some games from the early 3D eras didn't age that well. For example, no offense, but for example, games on PlayStation, Final Fantasy VIII. If you look at it now, it's all like, wow, like how?
How did we play those games back
Well, of course, to be fair, if you plug it back onto a CRT TV, it would automatically look better already.
Really?
Yes.
Makes a difference?
Yes, because, scan lines makes all the difference, and LCDs kind of blur all the colors together, right? So we're very honored to be working with SNK on this tour. As a fan, we've always wanted something like that, especially for games like King of Fighters 98, because there's no official way to play it online, right? Yeah. So you can't really play it with people from another country, for example. This game is like arguably one of the most popular fighting games, and it's especially popular in China, in Asia, in the Middle East, for example, in South America. Like there's all these really good players, and we've never had a platform to connect them to compete against each other, right? And so the mix for us is that we combine a classic King of Fighters, which is everyone's favorite, 98, and with the new one to kind of mix the people together. So King of Fighters 14 is more of like a modern esports type of game. So people are actually used to carrying their fight sticks. They travel to tournaments. King of Fighters 98, for example, has a lot of these players that grew up from the arcade era. So they don't know they actually have to bring a fight stick. They're not even used to that. But then we kind of brought them into the so-called modern esports scene. Right? This is what is more interesting about what we're doing. when we have one new and one old King of Fighters. And we also do a Metal Slug score attack.
I saw that, right?
Which is weird, you know, like people are like, what? Like, how do you actually make a tournament based on Metal Slug?
How many points you get in the shortest amount of time, or everyone gets like 15 minutes
Okay,
time?
so it's the first level of Metal Slug 1.
Yeah.
And it's a high score attack.
Okay.
So the highest points you can get for the first level of Metal Slug 1. And a lot of people kind of, we always see these replies saying like, oh, this is so easy, you know, I could have beat that score. But then if you do it at home, it's actually different from you doing
pressure
it.
when you're live,
exactly.
right?
So you're doing it in a tournament environment, and you have no practice. Actually, we do not allow people to practice. They just come and play.
Yeah.
So you better be ready and all trained up in your homes. And when you come, you actually just start. And you cannot die. If you need the high score, you cannot die. Because once you die, you lose all the scores from the prisoners. Right? So people like, I call him Master Terry. So Terry Kok from Malaysia currently holds the highest score for Season 2. I think it's like 200-something thousand points for just one level. Like, I mean, seeing him play live is like one of the most amazing and entertaining experience. Because he actually knows everything where it comes out, and he knows...
It's memorized everything. It's like speed running, right? People playing speed
but then
run.
he also remembers all these spawning points of how when you stay here, the enemies would keep respawning, and then I would get extra scores.
I see.
And in Metal Slug, if you kill an enemy with a knife and not, you know, the gun, it actually gives you more scores. So he would actually try to kill as many enemies with the knife rather than the gun. And then you're like, wow, like people really love the game so much at a level they would actually look into all these details. And it's just amazing. And the most amazing thing is in every stop, we see someone that is almost as good as him. Not as good as him, but then people are getting 180,000 points. You know, people are into this game. And we also love the fact that some people don't come to compete. You know, they just want to try it. You know, there's kids that saw the game and they're like, wow, it looks really nice. It's like 2D animation. They've never seen it, and they just want to try it out. You know? So it's kind of like a different aspect that we put into the tour that makes it more, you know, crowd pleasing, let's say.
And I think it appeals to more people, right? Because I think, you know, Street Fighter 5, yes, you have casuals, but most of those casuals are being played by professional players, right? And so it's not as easy. So can you just explain to everyone sort of how the King of Fighters 14 and 98 tournament structure? Do you guys have tournaments around the globe, obviously, and then people come and collect points, or is it more these events are isolated into these individual thing with the accumulation at the end of the season? Do you want to just explain to people how that all comes together?
Sure. So Capcom Pro Tour is point based.
Yeah.
So you add the total of scores you get in each stop. Yep. But then for us, we take a different approach. So we're kind of doing it like the World Cup. Okay. So we really try to have representatives from different regions.
I see.
And it's not point based. So for example, we just did a stop in Kuwait. In KBR 2019. We're trying to have a representative from that region. So if they win, we sponsor a round trip ticket to that person to come to the global finals. The SNK headquarters also sponsors a cash prize for them. And so we try to have one representative from 98 and one representative from 14.
That's cool.
For every stop that we go to. And then we bring them all to one global finals and duke it out, you know. So we have, I think, almost 30 stops in Season 2.
How do you do that, man? That is crazy logistically. Because it's not like, because I know Capcom, the difference is a lot of the time with Capcom is that they will help the event, but they have event organizers themselves. And it seems like you're doing most of that work, traveling every single week for these 30 slots.
I mean, we are, so we can't compare our budget with Capcom.
Of course, it's different.
I mean, I'm so jealous of the resources that they have. And you know, I would love to one day grow to that scale, but then I think it would be pretty hard. You know? And so we try to keep our team small. It's usually 2 or 3 of us that flies to that stop. We bring as much equipment as we can. So the streaming equipment, cameras, cables, all that. We use the luggage limit up to the very, very limit. And then we asked for the local partner. So for example, in Kuwait's case, it was GX and KBR.
Yep.
So we asked them to help provide some of the things that we cannot bring. So monitors, for example. We would love to bring our monitors, but due to luggage weight and due to the fragile nature of monitors. So these are some of the things that we asked them to provide. And we basically manage the whole thing. So we need the spot in the event. So we try to help to manage all the registration, the brackets, everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
2 to 3 of us, yeah.
Wow, it's still pretty amazing. 2 or 3 of you guys. And it's not like you're flying around the world everywhere. Like you're going to Europe, you're going to the Middle East, you're going to South America, you're going to like North America. It's crazy, man.
So some of the stops, we actually ask our friends to help us manage it.
Yeah.
Just because for the fact that we cannot really help due to language reasons and all that.
Yeah, I understand.
And we sometimes have really good friends and players that can help us. So for example, some of the stops in South America is done that way. We try as much as we can to fly to these stops and give them support and also to show the support. So it's I wouldn't say it's easy. Let's say we almost fly like every weekend right now to a different place, but in that way we also get to meet a lot of these players and meet some of the organizers and I think a lot of them are actually very passionate and I think it's just great to be meeting and kind of help in a way reconnect the lost community of KOF because how King of Fighters has so many different versions and I would say it's very fragmented.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one thing I want to just ask is, and get your personal opinion on it, is around King of Fighters and sort of where it went. Because when I was growing up, obviously we played Street Fighter V. Yes. Everyone was also playing King of Fighters, a little bit of Tekken at that stage. Yes. And then obviously my personal opinion is that obviously Street Fighter V has become a more and more popular franchise, and King of Fighters perhaps, was a bit more difficult compared to some of the other fighters. Yes. Why do you think that sort of was the reason? I know they released a lot of titles that Hot Dog was saying they were very unbalanced and sort of it became not as competitive. And also, I guess even King of Fighters 14 copped a little bit of flack, right, around its sort of graphics and things like that.
I think why it's all fragmented is because some King of Fighters are actually like very good, very balanced compared to other versions. So most people would say, for example, King of Fighters 98 is one of the better ones. 2002 for example, 13, these are all great games, but then the company itself went through a lot of management change in the days. Yeah. So as you remember, King of Fighters started in 94 and it kind of stopped in 2003, right? So it stopped and then it stopped using the year for the names. And then it came to there was a Neo Wave and then there's 11. Which is the 11th King of Fighters. That's why they called it 11. But then that was, in between, the company was bought out by a Korean company, and then it went through different stages, and it took them a while to kind of get their whole company back together. So it was, I think, January of 2018 that they really bought all these subsidiaries and all these branches and I didn't know that. Yeah. Yes, they kind of reformed the SNK. So now they're back to just SNK. But before there was SNK NeoGeo, SNK Playmore, Breeza Soft, there was a Wave Factory, Noise Factory. There were so many different companies that broke off from the original SNK. And so I think now they're back on track, I would say. And a lot of these older games, for example, well, not old, but then, for example, King of Fighters 14 are actually praised for their system, the fighting system. But then mostly people complain about the graphics of how it doesn't look current gen.
Yeah, I mean, I remember agree. I remember seeing some memes someone showed me, and they basically put the King of Fighters 14 character on one of the early versions of Tekken, right? Yeah, and they were saying the graphics.
I think that was Andy Bogart.
But definitely the games are strong. So I want to ask sort of around the communities. Where do you think the strongest players? Obviously, you have Shanghai from mainland China is incredibly strong. ET from Taiwan as well.
Yes.
What are some of the other regions? Is it is still a popular game in Japan, KOF 14?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, 14 and 98 are actually both very popular. And in some regions, 98 is still even more popular than 14.
Okay.
Just an example, right? The Kuwait stop that we just did, 98 had twice the signups for compared to 14.
Wow.
And that's usually the case. That's how weird this is when we're talking about esports. Everyone thinks about imagines about VR and Chroma and all these newer things, where we put a game that is 20 years old, right? 98 is 21 years old, into a modern esport kind of formatted tournament. It still brings in a lot of attention and crowd. And in our streams, for example, 98 usually draws the most views, which is, I think some of them are just curious as to, wow, why are these guys still hosting tournaments for a 20-year-old game? And a lot of them actually follows our page just to see how, kind of like the questions you asked, right? They're also wondering which region are the best players, right? For example.
Is there a large skill gap in your eyes between sort of, say, guys like Shanghai versus, say, the representative in Kuwait, or do you think the quality of the players in those regions in some of these other countries?
I would say they're pretty close.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, they're
cool.
pretty close.
Yeah.
So some of the stronger regions would be South America, South America and Latin America.
I wouldn't expect that. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah.
They actually still play a lot of 98 and especially 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, if any of the South American friends are watching, they are proud of their 2002 skills.
Yeah. Okay.
If I say that they are best in 2002, they would agree. They have a saying that 98 maybe Shanghai or the Chinese are the best, but 2002 is us, right? So they are very strong in older classic King of Fighters.
Yeah.
The Middle East, for example, other regions in Asia also. Actually, Malaysia, for example, is quite strong in 98. Indonesia, Vietnam, we have a stop. I'm very curious as to how they do, because I've heard of very good players in the south part of Vietnam. So we're really looking forward to Saigon Cup.
Yeah.
So there's actually quite a lot of good players around there.
Do a lot of the international talent travel to your events as well, or does it tend to be more localized to those things?
We try to make it more localized, just so that we have representatives from every region.
Otherwise, Viet Xiaohai attending every tournament, he'd win everything.
Well,
I understand.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of these players, I think, are very humble. When it comes to 98, they all say that, we can't beat Xiaohai.
Okay.
It's just impossible. But, I think it's not impossible, I would say. I mean, Xiaohai is good. He's, he can probably play, blindfolded.
Yeah.
He's that good. But then, I'm trying to say that there are a lot of great players, let's say hidden players in different regions, right? Okay. That they actually stand a chance. Okay. And that's why we have to go to all these different stops to kind of find the next guy who is maybe as good as Xiaohai, right? Or ET.
Cool. So sort of one last question before we wrap up today is what are your thoughts around sort of SNK pushing this esports platform? I know recently they made an announcement that they were helping out with tournament organizers around promoting these games more. Are they looking to create another King of Fighters soon? Are you aware of? And also, how do you sort of see the esports scene evolving for that game?
I think the management style of SNK changed quite a lot.
Okay.
So I would say they're much more open to newer ideas. In the past, they wouldn't focus on tournaments. And that's why they kind of licensed it to us to do it. They want to really focus on making great games.
Yeah.
So, for example, Samurai Showdown, it came out, I played
hype,
it.
Right?
Yeah, people love it. The art style and everything is great. And people are saying that SNK is back on track, right? And so they're more open towards supporting tournaments now. They have a esport support program.
Yeah, we saw that, yeah.
They are doing an official tournament from the headquarters for Samurai Showdown, for example.
Cool.
So they're actually doing much more than before. And I think Samurai Showdown would be a pretty hot game.
Seems like it's very popular. I mean, I saw everyone in the FGC playing that game, and when it came out, and in Japan, a lot of the Japanese players were playing it as well.
It's actually not coming out until the end of June.
Yeah.
But a lot of players have access to like an early version.
It was a nice event. They had Momochi and Chocoblanca go to that event, right? I think it was kicked off very nicely.
Yeah, really so Samurai Showdown is a game that I'm really looking forward to personally. I'm not sure if it would be as popular as King of Fighters, for example, in esports, but then it has its uniqueness because it's a sword fighting game, and on pace wise, it could be very fast all of a sudden. People would think that it's a very defensive game because one slash would take like half of your blood, right? So then you're kind of like that footsie kind of situation in Third Strike, right? Yeah. So that would be a great game, and according to what they have announced, King of Fighters 15 should be around 2020.
Oh, that's gonna be cool.
Yeah. And so that's what they said, and I guess that is the game that a lot of King of Fighters players are looking forward to, and they're seeing how Samurai Showdown has such a solid art style and graphics. Everyone is kind of like, wow, like the next King of Fighters is gonna look amazing. And for me, I think we are all looking forward to that as well, and I look forward to see how they would actually use something like Unreal for King of Fighters 15.
Are they using those engines to create those games? Or?
Samurai Showdown is on Unreal Engine.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we'll see. I mean,
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today. Just want to thank Dixon, man. Cheers, man. Thanks for coming down. That's a bit awkward. Thanks, Dixon, for coming down, and esports handshake. Dixon for coming down and showing us about sort of your work you're doing at Retro, the work at NeoGeo, as well as the Esports Association in Hong Kong. And I think we're going to talk about some interesting content ideas potentially we can work together on. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we could potentially explore here in Hong Kong. So
if you have any Chinese game magazines, books, CRT TVs that you don't want, game consoles that you don't want, please feel free to donate it to us. Sorry for this little...
No, that's right. How did they get to you? So you've got a Facebook page. What's the name of the Facebook page?
So just type Retro.HK and find us on Facebook and just message us.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's always good because, this stuff disappears otherwise, right?
Please don't throw them away. It's getting harder and harder to find. So,
Cool, man. Awesome, man. Cheers. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Cheers, man.
Thank you.